Time for a fresh look at the Lord Commander of the Imperium and what he can bring to the table in 9th edition. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Today we're focusing on none other than the Primarch of the Ultramarines himself, taking a look over his datasheet, any obvious combos and synergies that we can use with him, and talking about ways to play him in-game. Roboute Guilliman is one of the central characters to the Warhammer 40k storyline, famed as one of the greatest loyalist commanders in the Imperium, and was instrumental in chasing the traitor legions back into the Eye of Terror in the events following the Horus heresy. In a conflict against the Emperor's Children Legion, he was wounded in the neck by the demon Primarch Fulgrim, leading him to be placed in stasis at the perpetual verge of death. He remained preserved in stasis for 10 millennia, and was recently reawakened by the Archmage's Belisarius call with the addition of Eldar help. Since the splitting of the Imperium with the Great Rift, he led the newly formed Primarch Space Marines on a great crusade to drive back the traitors, and saw a lot of action against the demon Primarch Mortarion in the Plague Wars around Ultramar. He remains Lord Commander of the Imperium, and truly is a figure from legend returned to fight once more. Let's see what an actual loyalist Primarch can do on the tabletop then. So here we have the datasheet for Roboute Guilliman. He is a Lord of War choice for Codex Space Marines and will cost you 380 points to field. You'll want to run him as a Supreme Command detachment, as that way you get the command points refunded, so in terms of fielding him in an Ultramarines army list, he is really quite easy to include. His stat line is unsurprisingly very good. He has a movement of 8, weapon skill and ballistic skill of 2+, strength and toughness of 6, 9 wounds, 6 attacks, leadership 10 and a 2+ save, which is further augmented by a 3+ invul. 9 wounds is just the right side of being able to be protected as a character, and he's not going to go down to anything but a whole barrage of mortal wounds or a ton of concentrated firepower. That 3+ invul save in particular is a really good choice for command point rerolls if you do fail a save with him. If you can spare a reroll, then it means you've got a very good chance of passing it. In terms of keywords, he actually counts as a monster rather than infantry, and I can kind of see why they made that choice given the size of him. I'm sure the Ultramarines would maintain that he isn't a monster, he's just misunderstood. We'll go on to his mighty damage output in just a second, but of course, being one of the most important characters in 40k, he does have an absolute ton of special rules, and he does still give a full reroll aura for Ultramarines core units and characters within 6 inches of him. Most abilities that give you full rerolls to hit are now limited to once per squad in the new codexes, so he's likely to be one of the only examples where you can get this rule when all the 9th edition codexes have come out. It means that he's just a very powerful force multiplier, which is doubled down on by also giving Ultramarines core units reroll once to wound as well when they're within 6 inches. Basically, if you do have him wandering alongside any Ultramarines core units, they're going to fight far harder. You'll get around about 50% extra fire for an Ultramarine standing next to Guilliman compared with an Ultramarine standing on his own. As his full hit rerolls work on characters as well, it does mean that he'll be rerolling ones to hit himself, but he doesn't any longer reroll his own wound rolls due to his own aura ability. On top of those great buffs to Ultramarines, he also gives a decent command aura to any nearby Imperium units, which can lead to him having some surprising synergy in different army builds. His Master of Battle aura is a 12-inch aura, so affects a really quite big part of the battlefield. All Imperium units get reroll 1s to hit, +1 to advance and charge rolls, and he can also reroll morale tests as well for what that's worth. These can also be very helpful if he is in an Ultramarines army as well, as having those auras go all the way out to 12 inches means that you don't need to necessarily bunch up all that much with literally everything. The Imperium unit restriction isn't restricted to anything like core or anything like that, meaning it can be a way of getting reroll 1s on various big tanks and walkers, even things like Imperial Knights. Next, his Armour of Fate, as well as giving him a 3+ invul save, also gives him a 4+ chance to resurrect when he dies. The first time he's destroyed, you roll a d6, and on the roll of 4+, you set him back up with d6 wounds remaining. Sadly, it's far less reliable now you can't command reroll this, but still it is going to make your opponent think twice when they kill him, whether or not he might just be back for more in the next phase. Finally, if he is your army's warlord, and most of the time I imagine he will be, you'll get an additional 3 command points as well. This guy did write the Codex Astartes after all. Overall, Guilliman is a very expensive model, but he's a really powerful buffing piece, and a really powerful melee combatant as well. So let's talk a bit about his damage output. His Hand of Dominion can be used in shooting or melee. At range, it's a 24-inch range rapid-fire 3 weapon with strength 6, AP -1 and damage 2. Honestly, compared with his points cost, it is a bit insignificant really, but it can still be a handy little tool to have in the arsenal, just to be sniping away at certain elite units. where it will certainly add up the amount of damage over the course of the game. It gets very nasty when you're within 12 inches as well when you get 6 shots out of it, certainly likely to do a few more wounds to whoever it targets. When he's in melee, you can either choose to attack with the Emperor's Sword or the Hand of Dominion. The Emperor's Sword is strength +2, so strength 8, AP -4 and flat damage 3, and if you happen to roll a 6 to wound, then you get an additional D3 mortal wounds on the target as well. The Hand of Dominion is more of an anti-vehicle tool. It's strength 12, so strength ×2, AP -3 and a flat damage of 4. In terms of the damage output of these things, they're actually really quite similar, and it's not usually going to make the biggest difference which one you use, though one's always going to be better against each target, obviously. Against light infantry, you're going to be better off with a sword. You'll still be typically wounding them on 2s, and the extra chance to get a few mortal wounds could bump off a few more models. Against heavy infantry with 3 wounds and a 3+ save, the sword just wins out due to the chance of causing another death with mortal wounds and also the additional AP. For 4 wound models, you're going to be far better with the Hand of Dominion. For toughness 7 vehicles, it's almost equal, though the Emperor's Sword just wins out if you don't have an invul save on the go. And against toughness 8 vehicles, the Hand of Dominion wins by a decent amount. Typically, with either one of these weapons, you can have a very good chance of one-shotting a tank, or causing the death of around 3 or 4 heavy infantry. In terms of combos that you can use for Guilliman, unfortunately the Ultramarines Chapter Tactic and Combat Doctrine don't do a lot for him. Bolter Discipline doesn't work on monsters, unfortunately, and I think it's going to be quite rare that he wants to fall back and shoot from melee, as you're typically going to want to keep on hacking away with the Burning Sword. I think it is typically going to be worth it to make him your Warlord, just for that 3 command point bonus if nothing else. His actual Warlord trait isn't too bad though. It gives him a 6-inch bubble of heroic intervention, so all Ultramarine core units will be able to heroic intervene while they're within 6 inches of him. To actually go off, it does rely on your opponent putting units close to him and completely forgetting about this rule, but it can be kind of helpful for things like defending objectives. Say if you have a unit of aggressors on a midfield objective next to Guilliman, if the enemy wants to try and steal it off them, then they're going to have to accept that they'd get heroic intervened by the aggressors. There are a few characters who can do various bits to support him, despite being a monster and not an infantry model. For me, the most useful is probably a Librarian with Might of Heroes, which will get him to strength 9 with that Emperor's Sword, toughness 7 for enemy return attacks, and give him an extra attack on top of it to boot. Veil of Time could be handy as well for re-rolling charges and always fighting first. Chaplain Listeners could give him a +1 to wound or +2 to charge, though honestly I don't think that these are quite as good as the Librarian buffs, and if he did go down the Librarian pathway, you could well make it Tigurius on him to also give him -1 to hit as well. You could potentially try and give him objective secured if you wanted, by having another Ultramarines character nearby, and that character taking the objective secured Warlord trait that makes all Ultramarines next to them objective secured within 6 inches. Finally, if you wanted to try and keep him alive just that little bit longer, Victrix Honor Guard could be really good. They're maybe not the most threatening models in the world, but they are very, very tough and will tank a lot of wounds. Stratagem-wise, there aren't all that many that you're able to use on him. If he does get killed in close combat before he's struck, then only in death does duty end is probably a very good move. 2 CP for a round of Guilliman fighting is usually going to be worth it. There's a 1 command point one called a Fall Back and Re-engage from the Ultramarine supplement. That could be handy if he's in combat with something he doesn't want to be in combat with, to drop back, shoot, and then charge something different. And the Humble command point reroll is a really good thing to be using on Guilliman. We already mentioned it's really powerful in combination with a 3+ save, but also to help reroll charges and maybe just reroll the odd wound roll if it's really going to matter about getting an extra damage 4 attack through. Besides actually supporting Guilliman himself though, the main job he's going to be doing is trying to support other units. Ideally, to be making use of Guilliman's buff bubble, you're going to want to have multiple core units within that 6-inch range. If you just wanted to go sheer firepower for the amount of rerolls he has, then Redemptor Dreadnoughts seem like a very good choice. A very scary amount of firepower, and being able to reroll all of it will only make them better. They're quite easy to pack into aura range as well, seeing as they only have fairly small footprints as units go. Otherwise, pretty much any other core unit that you can fit in seems like a good idea to me. Intercessors maybe using rapid fire to shoot twice, Eradicators marching up the board and gunning people down with melters, maybe aggressors for some rerolls at range and in close combat, or you could even drop in things like Plasma Inceptors or Devastators nearby. For options with other armies, Guilliman plus Imperial Knights has certainly been a combo that people have used in the past. Extra distance to advance and charge, and reroll ones that they can't normally get are both pretty handy on really big models, and you're kind of doubling down on the really tough, really killy things that the enemy needs to try and shoot down. I think the combo was a bit more powerful in 8th edition though. You can also do things like give rerolls to assassins, as well as anything else, either Space Marines or not. But the problem with armies such as Sisters, Admech and Imperial Guard, they can all usually get reroll auras all by themselves anyway, and I think for the most part if you are taking Guilliman, you probably want the maximum amount out of his buffs, which means taking him alongside Ultramarines. So in terms of using Guilliman in-game, I think that the main challenge comes from getting the most out of his buff aura and his melee damage output. He's a really expensive model, it's going to be around about a fifth of your army in a 2k point game, and I just don't think it's going to be typically a good idea just to use him as a buff character to buff some guns, or just use him literally to be a melee beatstick, wandering around slapping things with the Emperor's sword. For the most part, I think that Guilliman kind of plays like your queen in chess, basically the most powerful piece on the board, but one you really need to protect, otherwise you're just going to lose him. Typically he's going to want to deploy fairly centrally in the Ultramarines army, then walk into the midfield while supporting an advancing gun line. I think about conga lining units to try and get them within that 6-inch aura. You basically want to have at least one model within the aura, and then everyone else can fan out a bit, and maybe be a bit closer to the enemy. You could also follow up behind him with maybe a few big guns. Things like Redemptor Dreadnoughts re-rolling all those hits are going to be really scary. When he's advancing into the midfield, he's likely going to want to go for at least one objective to thoroughly deny that to your opponent, or make them have to pay an enormous cost for trying to take them off him. I think ideally you want to keep him screened for the first few turns, and then charge in and commit to close combat at a key moment in the game, where he's going to break something really crucial. Until then, I just don't think he's tough enough for the points to just leave out in the open. In particular, if he gets targeted down with mortal wounds, that's probably the fastest and most efficient way to kill him. Guilliman's certainly a really powerful force on the table, and can certainly win games when he's played right, but I do notice that Guilliman lists often do tend to have issues in 9th edition. They really incentivize you to build one massive death castle in one part of the board, which means you're going to be very strong in that area, but it could mean that you could be a bit weaker in other areas. I would certainly want to make a strong Guilliman death castle if I was in the list, but the rest of the list really needs to be built around supporting that, having fast moving durable units to take other objectives and to hold down the rest of the field. There's certainly a danger of the enemy just shooting down everything else besides Guilliman, and when things are going badly you might just end up in a state where it's just literally him left on the board and no other Ultramarines to support him. As powerful as he is, you've basically lost by that point. As alternatives, I'd certainly think about Marnius Calgar. He basically just functions like a mini version of Guilliman these days. He's very similar in a very tough, fighty character with good buffing abilities, but you're only getting 210 points worth of those abilities rather than 380 points. He's still an all-round beast of a character, but approximately half as much so as Roboute. I think both of them absolutely have their place, it just depends on how much points you want to invest into the Death Castle strategy. If you literally just wanted buffs and rerolls, you might be better with just a captain and lieutenant. Overall though, for Ultramarines I think that Guilliman is certainly a competitive option in 9th edition, just perhaps a bit more of a challenge to make maximal use of compared with some other units. Having all of that buffing power and melee might all concentrated into one model does mean that you're going to have to make some tough decisions. When is the optimal time to engage, or should you hang back and support more guns, and how much damage can you risk him taking before he goes down? I feel that they've got his balance more or less right at the moment. Not an auto-include, though also not entirely useless. So let me know your thoughts on the Primarch of the Ultramarines down in the comments below, particularly if you've had any experience playing with or against him in 9th edition. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where we'll certainly be keeping the Space Marine unit reviews coming over the coming months. Finally, if you have been enjoying these videos and you'd like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention that I do have an Element Games affiliate link, which is down in the video description below. Element Games is a discount retailer within the UK that tends to give 10 to 20% off Games Workshop models, so if you were thinking about ordering in some Warhammer anytime soon, feel free to give them a look. If you click the link down in the video description, a small amount of money goes to help support the channel and doesn't cost you any more at time of purchase. Can just be a little way to help support if you were thinking about buying something anyway. For people in the USA and Canada, I do also have a very similar Amazon link. Again, if you click on that and order anything through Amazon whatsoever, a small amount goes to help support the channel while not costing you anything more. A massive thank you to you guys who have been using those links, it's really nice of you. And a really big thank you for watching the video. I'll hope to see you guys next time.